Let's cut to the chase now with Jane Marwick, who's a Macquarie radio broadcaster, Sky News host, joins us live from Perth. Thanks for joining us again, Jane. What about this? Donald Trump goes to Davos. He talks optimism head-to-head against a teenager from Sweden who's talking doom and gloom. And who should march into frame but former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull as well?
Yeah, what a surprise. What a surprise, and doing an interview with the BBC to boot. Look,
he always talks to The Guardian or the BBC or the ABC.
Yeah, I know. For the last 6 weeks I've been broadcasting and following people who, you know, want to make so much more out of these bushfires, like David Shoebridge just did with you. And I agree with you. Good on David Shoebridge, by the way, for agreeing to join you on Sky News. There's just one thing I wanted to say that he said, and that it's sort of like the Malcolm Turnbull stuff as well, where he said, you can show me that graph if you like, Chris. In other words, you can show me all the facts in the world if you like, but I've made my mind up. And Malcolm Turnbull's pretty much the same. And of course, we're going to have an intervention from him. But look, whilst Twitter will probably be very excited about it, I think Scott Morrison did a terrific interview with Peter Credlin yesterday. I think Matthias Cormann's been very good at Davos, and I think they're steadying the ship now. They had a bumpy start, but I think they're steadying the ship and they get the message about hazard reduction in particular.
Now, there's no shortage, of course, of former Prime Ministers from this country. Another one has bobbed up in Washington. Of course, Tony Abbott, speaking at the Heritage Society, he also spoke about climate change. Let's have a listen to a little bit of that.
Everything associated with an extreme weather event these days is taken as proof of climate change, whether it's extraordinarily cold or extraordinarily hot, whether it's extraordinarily dry or extraordinarily wet. It all proves climate change.
Well, there you go, Jane. As you know, I accept the climate change science, but all this alarmism, all this opportunism, he's dead right. Whatever happens, they always blame and say this is evidence of climate change.
Yeah, it's very frustrating given that none of the states have met their hazard reduction targets. I interviewed Tony Abbott at the end of last year when he was with the Davidson Brigade up in the Blue Mountains fighting those fires. I also interviewed Brian Williams, a firefighter of 52 years experience from Kurrajong Heights, who was fighting that Gospers Mountain fire. And he was at pains to say, now this man is apolitical. You talk to these volunteer firefighters. He had a great one on yesterday out of Canberra on this program. They're apolitical. Brian Williams told me that if you cooled the temperature by 2 degrees, it would have absolutely no effect on the fires. What we're seeing is enormous fuel loads. Some of the areas haven't been burned for 80 years. David Packham will tell you that if the Earth has warmed by his estimations by 1 degree over 100 years, that has an impact of about 3 degrees on bushfires. The multiplier is the fuel load, and that's where the intensity comes from.
Well, the drought's been critical too. The drought's been critical to the dryness, but we've heard from experts that you can't directly link the drought to climate change. So we have to be able to deal with drought. Sorry to hurry you along, Jane. I just want to bring in another former leader, not a former Prime Minister, but have a look at this clip. I reckon this guy has not given up ambitions for the Prime Ministership.
This disaster, in the worst of times, has brought out the best of people. We want to make sure people aren't slipping through the cracks. So today, talking with Fiona and talking with locals, there's 3 things which clearly I think the government could address more promptly.
Yeah, Bill Shorten with a nice little social media video. Nothing outrageous about it, but it just shows how he views himself and his political future, doesn't it?
Oh, it sure does. I thought the same thing. I thought, oh, he's got, as Peter Credlin said at the time, unfinished business. Then he went on to list the issues, and a couple of them were states issues, and then he talked about the small business loans, saying these people don't want a loan, they want a hand. I thought, my goodness, these are the same people who didn't want your 45% emissions target reduction, 50% renewables by 2030. These were the same people who know how expensive Labor's policies were going to be. But, you know, and then he was talking about the phone lines also, Chris. I thought it was a really cheap shot in a way, talking about the phones being down. Well, Bill, you've got all the power in the world. You ring Telstra and sort it out. To me, it was quite a cheap shot in a lot of ways, that video. I watched it a couple of times, thought, not only political ambition and aspirations there, but also come on, if you want to make a difference, pick up the phone and do something about it.
Look, maybe what we need in this country is some sort of institution for former leaders, because we've got Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott, Bill Shorten all out there playing into the political mix. Let's find somewhere they can all get together, and not to mention Kevin Rudd, of course, always out there. Mate, they should all get together and find some constructive use of their talents.
Yeah, well, look, I have to say, I think Tony Abbott's intervention and what he's had to say has been constructive.
Indeed.
And I really very much hope that people are listening to him, because of all the people commenting on the bushfires, he's been fighting them for years and he knows exactly what he's talking about, and he's surrounded by experienced people, Chris.
Indeed. Thanks so much for joining us again, Jane. Really appreciate your input.
Thanks, Chris.
Jane Marwick there. You can hear her on Macquarie Radio and see her on the front page here on Sky.